Chapter 47. In the next instant, Will Omsford realized that he could no longer see Amberley. He hesitated, thinking that somehow his eyes were deceiving him, that the fire was hiding her in the mix of shadows and crimson light, that she must still be standing there on the shelf of rock where she had stood a moment earlier. Yet, if that was so, why was it that he couldn't see her? He was staring toward the blood fire to find out when the scream sounded, high and terrible, as it lingered in the stillness. Wisp, Richia whispered in horror. She was already moving toward the passageway when Will caught up with her and pulled her quickly back toward the fire. Hebel backed away with them, one hand gripping Drifter's neck as the big dog growled in warning. Then they heard something pass through the waterfall. Not Wisp, Will knew. There was something else, something much bigger than Wisp. The sound of the passing told him that much. And if it was not Wisp, then who? The hackles on the back of Drifter's neck bristled up in fear, and the big dog dropped to a crouch, snarling. Behind me, Will motioned, Eritrea and Hebel back. Already he was reaching into his tunic, pulling free the pouch that held the Elfstones, backing to the edge of the rock. Where the blood fire burned, his eyes fixed on the chamber entry, he yanked open the leather drawstrings, his fingers groping frantically. It was the Reaper. Its shadow moved in the chamber entry, as soundless as the passing of the moon. The Reaper walked like a man, though was much larger than any ordinary man. A massive dark thing, larger than even Alanon. Robes and a cowl, the colour of damp ashes, were all that could be seen of it. As it slipped from the passage, the fire's crimson light fell across it like blood. Eritrea's frightened hiss cut through the silence. From a gathering of great hooked claws dangled the broken form of Wisp. Instantly, the curved dagger appeared in the Rover girl's hand. From within the black shadow of its cowl, the Reaper stared out at her, faceless, implacable. Will felt himself go impossibly cold, colder even than when he had first seen Melonroe. He felt total evil in the demon's presence, thought suddenly of its victims, of the elven watch at Draywood, of Crispin, Dilf, and Catson at the Pycon, of Cephallo and the Rovers at Whistle Ridge, all of them destroyed by this monster. Now it had come for him. He began to shake, the fear within him so strong that it was like a living thing. He could not take his eyes from the demon, could not bring himself to look away, though every fibre of his body begged him to do so. At his side, Eritrea's face was grey with terror, her dark eyes darting to find the Valmons. Hebel retreated a step further, and Drifter's snarl became a frightened whine. When the Reaper stepped clear of the chamber wall, the motion was smooth and noiseless. Will Omsford braced himself. The hand that held the Elfstones came up. The Reaper stopped, its faceless hood lifting slightly. But it was not the Valmon that caused it to hesitate. It was the crimson fire that burned beyond. There was something about the fire that disturbed the Reaper. Silently, the demons studied the blood-red flame as they licked at the smooth surface of the rock shelf and rose to the chamber ceiling. The fire did not appear to threaten. It simply burned, cool, smokeless, and steady, leaving no mark. The Reaper waited a moment longer, watching. Then it started forward. The dreams came back to Will Omsford in that instant. The dreams that had plagued his sleep at Havenstead and again at the fortress in the Pycon. The dreams of the thing that hunted him through mist and night. The thing from which he could not escape. The dreams came to him now, as they had come to him in his sleep, and all of the feelings that had swept through him then were reborn, yet stronger and more terrifying. It was a Reaper that had pursued him, its face never seen as it stalked him from the imagined dream world to the next, always just a step away. The Reaper, now come out of a nightmare into reality. But this time, there was nowhere to flee, nowhere to hide, no walking out of sleep, no waking out of sleep. This time, There was no escape. Elanon, help me. He retreated deep within himself and found the druid's words floating in a sea of unreasoned fear. Believe in yourself. Believe. Have confidence. I depend on you most of all. I depend on you. He gathered the words to him. Hand steady, he called upon the magic of the Elfstone, with everything he could muster. Down into the stones he plunged, feeling himself drop through layers of deep blue light. His vision seemed to cloud as he fell, and the scarlet glow of the blood fire seemed to fade to grey. He was close now, close. Could feel the fire of the Elfstone's power. Yet nothing happened. Panicked then, and for an instant the fear overwhelmed him so completely that he almost broke out and ran. It was only the realization there was nowhere left to run that made him stand fast. The barrier was still there, still within him, just as it had been within him following the encounter with the demon and the turfy, as it would always be within him, because he was not a true master of the Elfstones, not their rightful holder, nothing but a foolish veilman who had presumed that he could be something more than what he was. Healer! Eritrea cried desperately. Again the veilman tried, and again he failed. The power of the Elfstones would not be called forth. He could not reach it. He could not command it. Sweat bathed his face, and he clenched the Elfstone so tightly that the edges cut into his palms. Why would the power not come? Then as Eritrea stepped away from him, fainting suddenly with the dagger, calling the demon after her, the Reaper turned, the faceless cow following her as she moved slowly down the rock shelf, as if she thought to escape back through the chamber entry. Will recognized at once what she was doing. She was giving him time, a few precious seconds more to bring the power of the Elfstones to life. He wanted to call out to her, to tell her to come back, and to warn her that he could no longer use the magic, but somehow he could not speak. Tears ran from the corner of his eyes as he strained to break the barrier that locked him from the stones. She was going to die, and he thought frantically, the Reaper was going to kill her while he stood there and watched. Lazily the Reaper tossed aside what remained of wisp from beneath its robe. Hooked claws stretched out into the crimson light of the blood fire and stretched out toward the rover girl. Eritrea! What happened next was to be etched in his mind as if carved into rock, and a few seconds of frozen time, past and present, were gathered into one. As had once happened to his grandfather, Will Umford came face to face with himself. He seemed to hear Amberley speaking to him, her voice lifting from out of the red glow, cast by the blood fire on the chamber rock, steady, calm, and filled with hope. She spoke to him as she had spoken to him that morning after they had fled the Pycon, when the Myrmidon was carrying them safely south. Far from the horror of the night gone past, she told him, as she had told him then, that despite all that had happened, the Elfstones, the power of the Elfstones, was not lost, that it was still his, and that he might use it. But the power was lost. She had seen what had happened on the fortress catwalk. He had wanted desperately to destroy the demon after what he had seen it do to the gallant Crispin, yet he had stood there, the Elfstones clutched uselessly in his band, unable to do anything. The wind had not caused the catwalk to collapse. The Reaper would have had them. Surely she must see that the power was lost. Her sigh came back, a whisper in his mind. It was not lost. He was trying too hard. He was trying so hard that he was shutting himself away from the Elfstone. Something that would not be happening but for his inability to understand the nature of the power he sought to master. He must try to understand. He must remember that elven magic was but an extension of the user. Her voice faded and Eleanor's replaced it. Heart, mind, and body. One stone for each. A joining of the three would give life to the Elfstones. But will must create that joining. Maybe it would not be as effortless for him if it had been for his grandfather, because he was a person different from his grandfather. He is 2 generations removed from Sheldon's elven blood and what had come to his grandfather, but a thought might not come as easily to him. Much within him resisted the magic. Yes, yes, Will cried to himself. The man blood resisted. It was the man blood that kept him from the power of the Elfstones. It was the man blood, the non-elven part of him, that rejected the magic. Elanon's laugh was low and mocking. That was so. Then how is it that he had been able to use the Elfstones once before? The druid's voice faded as well. Then Will saw the deception he had worked upon himself since that moment within the turfing, when he had called forth the power of the Elfstones and felt the awesome magic flood through him like liquid fire. He had let the lie grow out of doubt that the power of the Elfstones was ever truly his to wield, and he had unwittingly reinforced it with Elanon's startling revelation that only elven blood gave mastery over the stone. How quick he had been to conclude that his man blood was the reason for his failure to use again the very same power that he had used within the turfing, even though his mix of man blood and elven blood was no different now than it had been then. He had deceived himself completely, perhaps knowingly, perhaps not willingly, but he had deceived himself nevertheless, and in doing so had lost the power of the Elfstone. How had it happened? Amberley had touched upon the truth when twice during their travels she had cautioned that in his use of the stones within the turfing it seems as if he had done something to himself. He had made light of the caution, trying to brush aside her concern, even while admitting to her that she was right. He had done something to himself when he had used the Elfstones, yet he could not trace it. He had thought that what he had done was physical in nature, but he had found nothing wrong. Amberley had suggested that it might be something more, that elven magic could affect the spirit as well, but he hadn't wanted to believe that. When he found nothing immediately wrong, he had been quick to dismiss the entire matter, to block it from his mind completely, because after all, he could not afford to spend time worrying about it himself when he had Amberley to look out for. There had been a very large mistake. He should have seen then, as he saw now, that Amberley had been right, that his use of the Elfstones had most certainly done something to his spirit, something so damaging until he came to grips with it, the power of the stones would be lost to him. What had happened to Will was that he had become afraid. He could admit it now. He must admit it. This was a fear he had not been able to recognize until now. Easily confused, cleverly concealed. All these weeks had been there, and he had not recognized it for what it was. For this was not a fear of the thing that haunted him in his dreams, or of the demon that had hunted Amberley and himself from Avalon. It was fear of the very thing that he had relied upon to protect them, of the Elfstones and of the effect that the use of their awesome, unpredictable power might have upon him. Understanding flooded through him. It was not like the mix of his man blood with his elven blood that was shutting him from the power of the stone. It was his fear of the magic. It had been his own doing, so determined that he had been to succeed in the task that Eleanor had given him, and that nothing would prevent him from carrying it out, that he had buried his feet at the instant of its birth in a well of determination. He had refused to admit it might exist, but had hidden it even from himself. Eventually, it had begun to affect the use of the Elfstones. There could be no joining of himself, of heart and mind and body, with the power of the stones, while such fear lay unrecognized within him. He had let himself believed that he was experiencing a rejection of the elven magic by the man-blood. With that, he had made the deception complete, and any further use of the stones had become impossible. Until now. Now he understood the nature of the barrier that shut him from the power of the Elfstones. It was the fear that had blocked him from the stone, and he might deal with that. He reached down within himself, a quick and deliberate act, joining as one heart, mind and body, willingness and thought and strength in a single unbreakable purpose. It did not happen easily. The fear was still there. It rose up before him like a wall, warning him back, eroding his purpose. It was strong, so strong that for an instant Will thought that he could not go on. There was danger in the use of the Elfstones, a danger he could neither see nor touch, define nor understand. It was there, real and tangible, and it could damage body and spirit irreparably. Irreparably. It could destroy him. Worse, it could let him live. There were things more terrible than dying. He fought against it. He thought of his grandfather when Sheolmsford used the sword of Shannara. There had been danger that the Valman had sensed yet not understood. He had told Will that, but there had been need for the magic of the sword, and the choice of his grandfather had been a necessary one. So it was now with Will. There was need greater than his own. There was a trust that had been given him, and there were lives that only he could preserve. Thrust himself deep into the blue light of the Elfstone, and the fear shattered before him. Man-blood gave way to elven, and the power of the stones surged up within him. Past and present split apart, and the seconds were gone. Eritrea! The Reaper was moving, springing soundlessly through the blood fire's glow toward the Rover girl. Will brought up the Elfstones, and their fire exploded from his hands into the demon, driving the creature back into the cavern wall. There was no sound as the Reaper struck, only a terrible silence as its robes collapsed against the rock. In the next instant, it was on its feet again, lunging for the bellman. Will would not have believed that anything so huge could be that quick. Almost before he could act, the Reaper was before him, claws ripping downward. Again, the blue fire burst from the Elfstones, hammering into the demon, hurtling it backward like a rag doll. Again, there was no sound. Will felt the fire within his body this time, coursing through him as if it were his lifeblood, and the feeling was that it had been in the turfy. Something had been done to him, something not altogether pleasant. There was no time to think on it. The Reaper's ash-grey form darted like a shadow through the half-light in a soundless rush. Fire burst from the Valman's outstretched hands, but this time the Reaper was too quick. Dodging the attack, it came on. Again Will tried to stop it, and again he failed and stumbled back, frantically trying to bring the elven magic to bear, but his concentration was broken, and the fire had begun to scatter. The Reaper darted through it, looming up before him. The last possible moment, Will managed to gather fire before him like a shield. Then the Reaper was upon him, knocking him violently back. Down he went, head slamming against the stone of the chamber floor. For an instant he thought he would black out. Claws tore at the blue fire, struggling to reach him. But the Valman fought the dizziness and the pain, and the Elfstone's magic stayed alive. The Reaper sprang back in frustration and circled silently away. Dazed, Will scrambled to his feet. His body ached from the force of the Reaper's attack, and there were spots dancing before his eyes. With an effort, he kept himself erect. Things were not working out as he had expected. He had thought, when he had broken through to the elven magic, that the worst was over, that at last he possessed mastery of a weapon against which the Reaper could not stand, that however powerful and dangerous the demon would be no match for the stones. Now he was no longer certain. Then he remembered Eritrea. Where was Eritrea? Within him, the elven fire twisted like an imprisoned creature. For one terrible moment, he was afraid that he had lost control of it completely. In that moment, the Reaper attacked him again, came out of the shadows, silent and swift, bounding into the glare of the blood fire. into the Valmon, almost of its own violation. The elven magic flared up between the combatants, a blinding explosion that threw both from the marrow cell. The unprepared Valmon was flung back into the cavern wall, ribs and the elbow of his free arm cracking like deadwood as he smashed against the rock. Searing pain lanced through him, and the arm went quickly numb. Somehow he struggled up again, bracing himself against the wall, fighting the pain and the nausea that washed through him. He cried out for Eritrea. The rover girl darted from the shadows, reaching him barely a step ahead of the Reaper. With a noiseless lunge, the monster came for them, too quickly this time for the dazed Valmon to act, who would have had them, but for Drifter, forgotten by all. The huge dog tore free of Hebel's grip and hurled into the demon. The monster tumbled back, a blur of bristling hair and teeth ripping into the ash-coloured robe. For an instant, both disappeared into the shadows at the front of the cavern. Drifter's snarl was deep and terrible. Then the Reaper heaved upward, flinging the gallant dog from him, swatting it as if one might swat a fly. Drifter flew through the air and smashed into the cavern wall, collapsing with a startled whimper into silence. Yet even those few seconds gave Will the time he needed to recover. His arm rose instantly and the blue fire thrust out. It caught the Reaper, a glancing blow, but again the creature twisted free, circling swiftly through the cavern, half-light until the pillar of the bloodfire screened it from view. The Valmon waited, eyes sweeping the chamber. There was no sign of the demon. Frantically he searched the shadows, knowing that it would come again. He could not find her. Richard crouched sobbing beside him, one hand still clutching the dagger, her face streaked with dirt and sweat. Hebel bent close to Drifter, whispering urgently. The seconds slipped away, still nothing moved. Then Will glanced up. The Reaper was on the cavern roof. He saw it just as it dropped toward him, grey robes flying wild. Frantically he shoved the Eritrea aside and brought up the Elfstones like a cat. The demon landed before them, massive and silent. The Eritrea screamed and stumbled back in horror. Slowly, the black hole of the cowl widened, freezing Will onward with its empty stare. The Valmon could not move. The blackness held him, faceless and deep. Then the Reaper lunged, and for an instant Will felt himself swallowed by the thing. Would have died, but then, for the power of the Elfstones, seeking stones, Eleanor had called them, and the warning cried out in his mind, seek the Reaper's face. Quicker than thought, the magic acted, blinding him to the terrible monster, to his fear and pain, and to everything but a primitive instinct for survival. He heard himself scream, and the blue fire exploded from him. It tore through the Reaper's faceless cowl, gripped the demon like a vice about its invisible head, and held it fast. Twisting desperately, the monster sought to break free. Will Omsford, his hands locked before him, and the elven magic swept from his shattered body into the Reaper, lifting it, thrusting it back against the cavern wall. There the Reaper hung, impaled upon the blue fire, writhing in fury as it burned. An instant later, the fire swept downward through the demon's robes and exploded in a flare of blinding light. When the fire died, all that remained of the Reaper was a charred outline of its twisted robe, burned deep into the cavern rock.